Diana and Stan had been married for more than 8 years. During that time, they had 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl. The wife, after her maternity leave, no longer worked. She was fully supported by her spouse. He earned good money. There was never a shortage of money. Diana could afford to go to beauty salons and spend a lot of money on clothes and entertainment, so she did not think about work. Stan was happy for Diana to stay at home. He didn't want a jaded wife who tried to be successful everywhere. He was sure that if his wife worked, there was no way she could pay enough attention to her children and husband. At times, Diana became bored with her routine. She wanted some kind of movement in her life. This was because she didn't have to worry so much and spend all her time on household chores. Most of the time, she was left to herself. The children went to kindergarten, and Diana had time not only to do all the things, but also to get bored alone. So the arrival of her brother Stan brought some variety to her life. She had never seen Sebastian in person. She knew him only from photographs, and the pictures were pretty old. He was about 18 years old there. He moved to another city for his studies and stayed there. Then he was able to set up his own business related to tourism. Then he got married and never came to his hometown again. Their mother flew to visit him every year. Stan also visited him sometimes, but that was before they met Diana. Later on, life got on top of them both, and somehow they didn't have time for meetings and trips, and now they communicated only by phone. Recently, Sebastian's business went bankrupt and he divorced his wife. Life was not going well for him, and his brother invited him back to his hometown. Stan even offered him a job, and Sebastian agreed to the move. He could not go back to his mother. She had a 1-room apartment, so Stan invited his brother to settle down with him. After the divorce, Sebastian lost everything and left the apartment to his ex-wife and children. He had no savings, so he needed time to get back on his feet. He had to start his life from scratch. Stan had a big house, and there was no problem finding a room for his brother. Their first meeting with Diana caused a storm of emotions for the woman. She knew Sebastian was a few years older than her husband, so she had expected a full man with white hair. But her husband's brother wasn't like that at all. He looked much younger than his years. His athletic figure, trendy haircut, and expressive dark eyes impressed Diana. She even felt uncomfortable in his company. Sebastian looked at her curiously, and she knew by the look in his eyes that he also appreciated her appearance. She had an inexplicable feeling of unease. Her brother had settled into the couple's home, and for the first month, Stan had given him time to settle in and try to find work himself. If he didn't work out, he would work in the company with Stan. Looking at Sebastian, Diana knew he would quickly become successful and get on with his life. He had a great sense of strength in him, and the problems that arose after the business failure only hardened him. One day, her husband left for work, and Diana took the children to the garden and then returned home. Sebastian was sitting in the living room at the computer at the time. The first day, they didn't talk much. He went about his business, and the woman went about hers. On the second day, while Diana was cooking dinner, she cut her finger very badly and cried out in surprise. Sebastian immediately jumped up to her. He clamped a towel over the wound and then helped treat the cut. When he touched Diana, she felt an electric shock. Her heart began to race, and she heard an unearthly humming in her ears. Unexpectedly, she felt warmth in her abdomen. Sebastian seemed to mistake her condition for consternation at the sight of the wound. He chattered cheerfully, trying to distract the woman, and she couldn't take her eyes off his lips. When she was finally bandaged, he looked her straight in the eye. In some incredible way, it was as if he understood what was going on in her head. The man smirked and went back to the computer again. For several minutes, Diana sat on the couch, unmoving, trying to regain her breath. She did not understand what was happening to her. Never before had she felt such strong emotions, even for her own husband, and this man, whom she had known only a few days, made her lose her head with one touch. Her gaze dipped down, and she saw the whole altercation with blood. The woman quickly went to the bedroom to change and take a shower. In the bathroom, she threw her dirty clothes right on the floor and crawled under the warm water. She stood there with her eyes closed, raising her cut hand to keep the bandage from getting wet. She stood like that for about 5 minutes, and then she felt a man's hands on her. It was Sebastian. He quietly entered the bedroom and walked into the bathroom, which Diana didn't lock. She cried out quietly in surprise and at first tried to pull away, but then gave in to her desire. When it was over, Sebastian kissed her silently and left. The woman wrapped herself in a large towel, lay down on the bed, and covered herself with a blanket. A lot of questions flashed through her mind. How could this happen? How could she let this happen? In spite of this, their intimacy gave her great pleasure. A couple of hours later, her wife came out of the bedroom, her husband's brother still sitting at the computer. Diana didn't know what to say, but neither did Sebastian. After that, she left the house in silence and went to get the children. The whole next month, the same scenario happened. The husband left for work. She would take the children to daycare, then she would arrive and take a shower, and after a while Sebastian would join her. All these days were at their complete disposal. They walked around the house with practically no clothes on, fearing nothing, chatting merrily with each other, discussing everything in the world. At certain moments, Diana caught herself thinking that she wished Sebastian had had more money. She thought they might have made a good couple. Her husband didn't give her as much time as he used to, and with his brother she felt wanted again. Diana seemed to notice the change in her to everyone. She didn't walk, she just flew. The very thought of them doing this right in front of her husband's nose excited her. Now her life didn't seem boring anymore. They had fun with Sebastian every day. Sometimes she was afraid her husband might find out about their betrayal, but he never came home during work hours. But there is always a first time for everything. Quite unexpectedly, after a month of their secret lovemaking, they were caught. They were just lying naked on the marital bed and talking. All of this was happening right after intimacy, so they took their time getting dressed. Perhaps if they had been dressed, things would have worked out differently. That day, Stan forgot his papers at home. Sometimes he forgets something, but he usually never returns it, considering it a bad omen. But this time, it just so happened that he needed his documents in a hurry, so he went home to get them. If Diana and Sebastian hadn't laughed so loudly, her husband would have just taken the papers he left behind and left. But Sebastian was telling Diana something funny, and she laughed loudly. Stan went into the bedroom and was taken aback when he saw them. At that moment, Diana almost fell off the bed in surprise. She grabbed the robe lying next to her and hastily wrapped herself in it. The wife realized that this was the end. Sebastian turned pale in silence, rose from the bed, and began to dress quickly. His brother came at him with his fists. A scuffle ensued. After a while, it was over. Stan was breathing heavily from the tension. He told his brother to get out of the house now. Sebastian left the room in silence, while her husband looked at his wife with anger. His fists clenched, and Diana became very afraid and ashamed. She was ready to fall through the ground. She didn't know how to explain her behavior, but Stan didn't ask anything. Sebastian packed his things and left for an unknown destination. His mother tried to find out what had happened, but Sebastian would not answer the phone. Stan preferred not to say anything. The man filed for divorce. He didn't want to sell the house, so he gave his ex-wife the value of her half and even added a tidy sum in exchange for Diana giving him the children. The woman agreed. She realized that it would be difficult for her to carry everything on her own. With this money, Diana bought herself a small apartment on the outskirts of the city and began to live there alone. The children stayed with their father. Now Diana had to earn her own living. Beauty salons every week and expensive shopping were out of her reach. After much wandering, She finally got a job as a cashier in a grocery store near her home. Because she succumbed to the weakness that had cut into her head, Diana crippled her life and was left without children and a husband. She didn't appreciate what she had and, most of all, regretted the loss of her unlimited monetary security. With a loving and successful husband, healthy children, and free time for herself, she herself pushed it all away because of banal boredom. And now that no one was helping her anymore, the woman had no time to be bored and think about silly things. Let's move on to the next story, which is even more interesting. Katie and Mark had been together for almost 15 years. Their daughter was 13 and their son 11. They had a strong love marriage. The couple lived together as friends, trying to solve all their problems peacefully without declaring war. One day, Katie got a call from a neighbor to her mother, who explained that she was ill and needed her daughter's help. The woman, without thinking twice, left the children to her husband and went to the village herself. Mark grumbled, but he had no choice. Katie would not leave his mother. Perhaps such a long pause was necessary for their exhausted relationship. Lately, the couple had noticed more and more that they were drifting apart. They no longer lay on the couch in the evenings, cuddling, watching movies. They no longer discussed how their day at work was going, nor did they share personal memories. More and more often their conversations resembled a set of standard phrases. "How are you?" Katie asked when her husband came home from work. "I'm fine. I've been on the phone all day today. How are you?" Mark answered her, kissing her on the cheek. They routinely discussed the children's school problems, how much money they needed to pay for a tutor this month, and that was about it. Mark was getting frustrated. He wished he could bring back the warmth he and Katie had felt, but the man didn't know how to do that. Katie, of course, saw the same things as her husband, but she had no need for a return of her former feelings. The woman felt that everything that was happening to them now was natural, because she and Mark had been together for nearly 15 years. You can't live together with a man for that long and not talk it out. Yes, she respected her spouse, was attached to him in a family way, loved him, but as a man has long cooled. So Katie was even glad that her mother needed her help and had a chance to sneak out of the house for a while to rest, to catch her breath in solitude. Upon her arrival, Katie plunges headlong into Lisa's problems. Lisa is Katie's mother. She had no time to think about anything else. After the obligatory tasks were done, the woman simply enjoyed the fact that, at least for a time, she belonged only to herself. Then she had the urge to take over her mother's house, to repair it, to clean it. Little by little, her mother was getting better and was happy to see her daughter. Despite frequent phone calls, they rarely saw each other in person. Katie was preoccupied with family life and 2 children, and Lisa with the household, which she had no one to leave behind to visit her daughter for long periods of time. When Katie needed manpower for repairs, her neighbor Morris came to her rescue. She remembered Morris as an absurd teenager with a face covered in freckles. Now there stood before her a grown man with strong arms and short-cut hair. The freckles on his lighter face had almost disappeared, and suddenly Katie noticed for the first time since they had known each other that he was good-looking. In the evening, her mother told her that her wife had run away from Morris to the city, unable to stand the real country life. There was nothing to be surprised about, and the woman did not condemn her in the least. To be a countryman was not an easy task, and not everyone could do it. Even Katie herself, having studied at university, could no longer return to her parents. The city beckoned her with opportunities. Katie's assistant was not the chatty type. At first she tried to make him talk, reminiscing about her younger years, her time at the village school, but he only answered briefly and went on about his business. This made her nervous and angry. When the repairs were finished, the woman invited her neighbor to celebrate over dinner and a bottle of something stronger. Morris' face lightened. He smiled and agreed. "Drinkers, are they?" asked Katie to her mother when Morris left. "What's the matter with you?" Don't talk nonsense. He's not like that. Lisa shushed her. The evening was truly kind and cozy. The women were enjoying the renovations, and Morris was enjoying the delicious dinner the landlady had prepared for him. Katie lost count of how many times her mother thanked her neighbor for his help. She knew that all this constant talk about how good Morris was and what golden hands he had was more about herself. Her husband, Mark, could do almost nothing with his hands, but he always paid, without question, for any handyman who was needed to fix anything in their house. A son-in-law would never help his beloved mother-in-law with repairs, and Lisa was terribly annoyed by that. Years ago, her mother was the one who persuaded her not to marry Mark and to look at someone else. Katie did not regret her choice of a spouse and considered herself lucky to have him. The circumstances of their lives were just different. After a few drinks, Morris got to talking and turned out to be a remarkably pleasant companion. They chatted into the night and continued even after Lisa had gone to bed. In Katie's own mind, the village man must be uneducated, thinking only of his work and the household that was on him. She never expected to be able to discuss with her neighbor not only his work as a carpenter, but also the books he reads in his spare time. So you, beautiful you have become, Katie was good, and you have become even better. Morris said suddenly, smiling. His companion was embarrassed by his words. She waved her hand at him and smiled quite a bit as well. I remember when I was in love with you in school. Every day, I wanted to come up and confess, but I was incredibly shy, the man admitted. Well, at least now I can say it. Katie suddenly felt a desperate urge to snuggle up to this huge, clumsy man with her whole body and kiss him soundly. She couldn't deny herself that pleasure. Morris reciprocated, pulling her as close to him as possible. So as not to wake Lisa, she drunkenly, laughing, ran away to his house. Without hesitation, Katie could say that these few weeks spent with Morris were a breath of fresh air for her. In her marriage, she had completely forgotten what it was like to feel such vivid emotions. Every night, she discovered something new about herself, enjoying herself and her lover. She didn't want to think about returning to the city anytime soon, but she couldn't help but return. There were children waiting at home, and they were not too young, but they obviously needed their mother. Morris was well aware of that, though she could tell he was sad. Why don't you talk to your husband? Come back here, he asked his sweetheart. Katie smiled sadly and answered that she could not. I have children, understand. I do not want to traumatize them. Imagine that we are having a holiday romance, and it is about to end. Only light sadness will remain. After returning to the city, the hardships of family life immediately came upon the woman. It seemed to her that in her absence, the problems were not solved from the word at all, just put aside in a long box with the title until the return of her mother. She was very angry and constantly nervous, snapping at those closest to her. Of course, Katie understood that the main reason for her condition was the painful breakup with Morris. But she couldn't admit this to herself or her family. She continued to be helplessly angry and wouldn't give up trying to get back into their familiar family life. One day, Mark could not stand another attack from his wife and directly asked, "What is it?" Katie suddenly looked painfully into his eyes and said firmly, "We need a divorce." It sounded like thunder from out of the blue. But to keep his wife by his side, even after many years together, Mark could not, so he said yes. The woman did not move in with Morris. She felt no love for him, but was grateful that he opened her eyes and gave her the strength to leave the marriage. She had raised her children alone, and when they fled the nest, she was left alone. Katie did not regret her decision. She had lost her husband in Mark, but she had gained a good friend. The former spouses supported each other as best they could, trying not to lose contact. But both were hopelessly lonely, unwilling to let anyone else into their lives. Share in the comments what you think about this situation and the behavior of the characters.